The call came at 2 in the morning, which is the hour when bad news always seems to arrive, as though it waits politely for the rest of the world to go quiet first. I was between cases. I had finished a 6-hour posterior fossa decompression and was drinking terrible coffee in the surgeon's lounge when my phone lit up on the table. I looked at the screen. My brother Rajan. We hadn't spoken in 8 months, I answered. It's Dad, he said. He's had a stroke. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not grief exactly, more like the particular panic of someone who has always assumed a safety net exists and has just looked down and noticed it isn't there. Which hospital? I asked. He told me. I'll be there in an hour. I drove through empty streets with the window cracked because I needed the cold air to keep my thinking sharp. Not because of my father. I was already thinking clearly about my father, but because of everything else. The years compressed themselves into that drive, in the way that significant moments sometimes force you to carry the entire weight of your history all at once. My father was 71. He had a history of hypertension he managed inconsistently. A stroke had always been a statistical possibility I'd kept filed somewhere in the back of my mind. What I hadn't filed anywhere was the possibility that the night I drove to his bedside, Rajan would be standing there with the expression of a man who finally needed something from me. My name is Dr. Priya Anand. I'm a consultant neurosurgeon. I have worked in 3 hospitals, survived a training period that nearly broke me twice, and spent approximately 15 years becoming someone who can operate on the most complex structure in the human body without her hands shaking. My brother, Rajan, spent the same 15 years living off our parents' money and calling it a temporary arrangement. I want to be fair about this because Rajan is not a simple person and our family is not a simple story. He is 2 years older than me. He was always the easier child, easier to understand, easier to love in the uncomplicated way that families love children who reflect their expectations back at them. He was social, charming, effortlessly popular in the way that certain people are popular because the world is arranged slightly in their favor and they are pleasant enough not to abuse it too obviously. He also never finished anything. He started a business degree and left in the 2nd year when he discovered it required more than charm to pass statistics. He started a property business with money our father gave him as a loan that everyone understood would never be repaid. He had a period running what he called a consulting operation that I never fully understood and that seemed to involve taking meetings and charging fees for advice that led nowhere. Our parents gave him money each time, not because they were foolish. They were not foolish people. My mother worked as a midwife for 27 years. My father managed a logistics company and understood numbers precisely. They gave him money because he was their son, and he was struggling, and they believed each time that this time would be different. I never asked for money, partly because I was funded through my medical training by loans and bursaries, and the particular financial ingenuity you develop when you are simultaneously a junior doctor earning a modest salary and trying to maintain the basics of a human life, partly because asking felt impossible. Every time I saw money move toward Rajan, the property loan, the consulting capital, the quiet bank transfers I only knew about because my mother mentioned them in passing, something solidified in me that I never named at the time but would now describe as a decision, a choice to build something that couldn't be given or taken away by someone else's accounting. My parents were not intentionally unfair. I believe that completely. But intention and impact are different things, and the impact accumulated. The most specific moment came during my 3rd year of specialty training. I was a registrar. Neurosurgical training is long, longer than most surgical specialties, and the registrar years are the stretch where the gap between what is required and what is sustainable becomes most visible. I was working, at that point, long weeks regularly. Not dramatically. I was not the only person doing it, and self-pity is not especially useful in a specialty where your patients have brain tumors, but consistently demanding weeks that left very little space for ordinary human maintenance. I came home for a Sunday lunch my mother had organized. I had driven 90 minutes. I was in the door for perhaps 40 minutes when my father, over rice, mentioned that he had helped Rajan with a short-term cash flow problem. The amount was not specified. It was never specified. But from the texture of the conversation, from the particular way my mother looked at her plate, I understood it was significant. I went home that evening and sat in my flat for a while. I thought about the loan I was still repaying for my undergraduate and graduate training. I thought about the nights I had worked. I thought about the Sunday I had driven 90 minutes to sit at a table and hear my father explain, with genuine kindness and no awareness of contradiction, that he had solved my brother's problem again. I didn't say anything that Sunday. I drove home. I cried for a short time. Then I wrote notes for the surgical audit I had due at the end of the week, because I had patients and responsibilities, and the audit couldn't write itself. That's the part people don't often tell about difficult feelings. Most of the time, the world doesn't pause to accommodate them. You absorb what happened, and then you continue, because continuing is the only available option. Rajan knew, on some level, that I was aware of the imbalance. We never discussed it directly. Our conversations at family gatherings had a careful quality, like two people navigating around furniture in the dark. He sometimes made comments. At a family occasion, when someone asked about my training, Rajan said, "Priya's going to save all our brains. Just don't ask her for normal conversation at dinner." Laughter. I laughed too. I had developed a very practiced laugh for those moments. Once, when I'd been called back to the hospital during a family gathering because of a surgical emergency, he said to the table as I was leaving, "She prefers patients to people. At least they can't answer back." More laughter. I closed the door behind me. Part of what made those comments effective, and I can see it clearly now in a way I couldn't at 28, is that they were accurate enough to sting. I did prefer the operating theater to certain social situations. I did communicate more easily around clinical problems than around dinner table dynamics. Rajan found the edges of real things and pressed on them. He wasn't entirely malicious. He was deflecting. When someone around him was succeeding in a way that highlighted their own stagnation, that deflection is understandable. Not acceptable, but understandable. Neurosurgical training reshaped me in ways I was only partly aware of while it was happening. My first independent procedure, a relatively straightforward case by surgical standards, though no cranial procedure is ever completely straightforward, left me standing at the scrub sink afterward with my hands shaking very slightly. Not from technical failure. It had gone well. But from the accumulated weight of every instruction, every supervised case, every moment of controlled uncertainty that had been building toward a moment where I was the one responsible for what happened inside someone's skull. My trainer at the time, a consultant named Mr. David Osei, found me at the sink. He looked at my hands. "First solo?" "Yes." "Patient's fine?" "Yes." "Then go eat something. That's not weakness. It's just your nervous system catching up." He walked away. I always remember that, not because it was profound, because it was practical in a way that helped more than comfort would have. I ate something, then I went back to work. The years that followed included the full range of what surgical training contains: cases that went better than expected, cases that went worse, a moment in my fourth registrar year when I made an intraoperative decision that my consultant later told me had been technically sound but unnecessarily conservative, and a different case where I was too confident in my initial plan and had to adjust under pressure in a way that aged me noticeably. Both of those experiences improved me. The first one taught me to distinguish between caution that serves the patient and caution that serves my own anxiety about being wrong. The second taught me what overconfidence actually feels like from the inside, which is an important thing for a surgeon to know. I qualified as a consultant neurosurgeon at 36. My parents attended a small celebration dinner. My mother cried. My father shook my hand, and then, apparently unsure whether that was sufficient, hugged me and patted my back several times. Rajan didn't come. He sent a text. "Congrats, Priya. You did it." I read it twice. Then I put my phone away and rejoined the dinner. 2 years after my consultant appointment, my father had his stroke. The hospital where he'd been taken was not my hospital, but I knew the neurology team there. I arrived in the early hours of the morning to find my mother sitting in a family waiting room with the expression of a woman who has spent her professional life managing emergencies for other people and has now discovered that this does not immunize you when the emergency is your own. I held her hand. Then I went to speak with the registrar on call. His name was Dr. Amit Kapoor Young, clearly tired, clearly competent. He took me through my father's presentation, left MCA territory, ischemic stroke. He had been found by my mother fairly quickly, which mattered enormously given time-sensitive treatment windows. He had been assessed and treated appropriately. The imaging showed the affected area. His right arm was weakened. His speech was affected. Prognosis? I asked. Dr. Kapoor was honest. Too early to say with confidence. The next few days will give us a clearer picture. I thanked him. Rajan was in the corridor outside my father's room. We looked at each other for a moment. How bad? He asked. Speech affected. Right arm weakness. We'll know more in a few days. He nodded. He looked frightened, not in a performance of fear, actually frightened. I felt something complicated happen in my chest that I didn't have space to examine right then. We went in together. My father was awake. He tracked us with his eyes when we entered. When he tried to say my name, what came out was a sound that had the shape of it, but not the letters, and my mother pressed her lips together and looked at the window. I sat beside him. "I'm here," I said. "You're in the right place." He looked at me with the particular attention of someone for whom communication has just become enormously effortful, and I understood in that look everything he couldn't say. Over the following days, my father began the slow process of post-stroke recovery. His speech improved in fragments. His motor function on the right side began returning, again in the nonlinear, uneven way that neurological recovery characteristically unfolds. The prognosis shifted toward cautiously optimistic. Rajan stayed. That surprised me more than it probably should have. He stayed at our parents' house, managing things, coordinating appointments, driving our mother to the hospital when she didn't feel able to drive herself. He wasn't dramatic about it. He was simply present in a way I hadn't seen from him in years. We had several conversations during those days that were more direct than anything we'd managed in probably a decade. One evening I found him in our parents' kitchen going through financial papers with a look on his face that I recognized. It was the look of someone encountering an arithmetic problem and not liking the answer. "There's not much left," he said. I sat across from him. "I know." He looked at me. "You knew?" I could see the direction. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I took a lot." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "You did." Another silence. "I kept thinking it would turn around," he said. "I know." "That's not an excuse." "No, it isn't." He looked at the papers. "I've been working," he said, "properly, for about a year." This was new information. "Doing what?" "Sales management. It's not impressive." "Is it stable?" "Yes." I nodded. He looked at me in a way he hadn't for a long time, without the social layer that usually sat between us. "I was jealous of you," he said, "for a long time." I hadn't expected that. "You never showed it like that." I showed it like an idiot instead. The conversation stopped me in the way that honest things sometimes stop you, because they require you to update something you've been carrying in a fixed position for a very long time. I had spent years being angry about the money. Not constantly. I wasn't a person who lived inside grievances, but it was there, structural, part of the way I understood our family. Sitting across from Rajan in our parents' kitchen at 2 a.m. with our father recovering in a hospital, I understood that the money had been a symptom of something else, a family's anxiety about one child and a complete underestimation of another. The first child had taken what was offered because it was offered, and because he was frightened underneath the charm, and because nobody had ever required him to build anything genuinely his own. None of that made the lost money appear. None of it repaired the Sunday lunches, or the comments at dinner, or the text message sent instead of a flight ticket, but it changed the shape of my anger from something hard and fixed to something I could look at from different angles. "You should have come to the dinner," I said, "when I qualified." He didn't look away. "I know." "Why didn't you?" He took a long time with that. "Because you'd done something I hadn't, and I didn't know how to be in the room with it." That answer cost him something. I could see it did, and I found I didn't want to press on it further. "Dad is going to need rehabilitation," I said. "I know. It'll take time, months, possibly. I'm not going anywhere." I looked at him. There was something different in his face that night. Not transformed. People don't transform overnight, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But older, more present in the way that responsibility makes people present when they finally decide to carry it. "Okay," I said. My father spent 3 weeks in the stroke rehabilitation unit. I visited 3 times a week, fitting it around surgical lists that couldn't be moved. I liaised with his neurologist and physiotherapist, not to override them. They were excellent, but because a daughter, who is also a doctor, exists in 2 different relationships with a patient simultaneously, and I'd learned over years that the useful version of that combination is translation, not interference. I translated for my mother when the medical language confused her. I asked the right questions when the team hadn't considered something. Once, I disagreed with a medication decision, explained my reasoning to the registrar, was asked to discuss it with the consultant, did so, and was told my concern was valid, but that the balance of evidence supported the current approach. I accepted that. The consultant was not wrong. The distinction between being a doctor and being a daughter remained difficult throughout. I managed it, imperfectly. My father's speech returned significantly over those weeks. Not completely. Post-stroke recovery has a ceiling that is individual and unpredictable, but enough. Enough that when I visited on a Thursday evening and sat beside his bed, he could find my name without difficulty. "Priya." "Yes, yes." He looked at my face for a long time. "I know," he said slowly, carefully choosing the words that came most readily, "that we didn't always. Dad." "Let me finish." The oral down. "Rajan needed more help. We gave him more help. But you—" He stopped, found the next words. "You didn't need us to help you, we thought." The effort it cost him to say that, post-stroke, with his speech still finding its way back, that cost was visible and real. "It's all right," I said. "It isn't." I took his hand, the left one, which was stronger. "It wasn't at the time," I said, "but it's manageable now." That was the truest version I had, because I had spent years turning the unfairness into fuel, and the fuel had built something that now stood independent of the original injustice. I didn't need compensation. I didn't need them to have been different parents. The person I had become was built partly from what they'd given me, and partly from what they hadn't, and I couldn't remove one without dismantling the other. My father came home 6 weeks after his stroke. He walks with a stick. His speech has plateaus where it rests and then improves again in small increments. His right hand is weaker than it was. He does his physiotherapy exercises with the same methodical approach he used to apply to logistics problems, which I find, privately, both touching and entirely predictable. Rajan visits every week. He takes my father to his outpatient appointments on the weeks when I cannot. He and I speak on the phone more than we have in 15 years, not deeply, not without the residue of things that happened, but genuinely. We are figuring out how to be siblings in adulthood in a way we didn't manage when we were younger, and it is awkward in the way that genuine things sometimes are when they come late. Last month, I operated on a 44-year-old woman with a complex intracranial meningioma. The tumor's position required extensive planning, a specific surgical approach that we rehearsed with our team and debated with neuroradiology, and an operating time that ran long. She recovered well. On the day I reviewed her before discharge, she asked me how I had chosen neurosurgery. I thought about the honest answer for a moment. I wanted something difficult, I said, something that would ask more of me than I thought I had. She looked at me. Did you find it? Every day, she smiled. I drive past our parents' house most Sundays now. Sometimes Rajan's car is already there. We don't pretend that the years of distance and imbalance didn't happen. We don't reconstruct a closeness that never quite existed. We are two adults who share parents and history and a complicated accounting of what was given to whom and what was built regardless. And we are learning, slowly, how to be in the same room with all of that, without needing it to resolve into something cleaner than it actually was. My mother made rice last Sunday. Rajan argued with my father about football. My father argued back, which he can now do with reasonable fluency, which is its own kind of miracle. I sat at the table and watched, and I thought about the nights, the early mornings, the training years and the loan repayments and the Sunday lunches where money moved in directions that didn't include me. I thought about the cases, the ones that went well and the ones that didn't, and the ones that changed how I thought about my own limitations. I thought about the 2 in the morning drive through empty streets when my brother called and I went, not because he deserved it, not because the ledger had been settled, but because my father was 71 and had just had a stroke, and I was a neurosurgeon, and I was his daughter, and some things exist outside the accounting of who got what, and who worked how hard, and whether it was fair. It wasn't fair, but I went anyway, and I would go again. That is the thing my training ultimately taught me, that no examination tested, that the most important decisions you make are rarely about what people deserve. They're about what you are willing to be.